Hi, this is János. It's Real World Audio. I'm checking. Yes, it's recording. And as you can see, you are in the middle of a construction zone. Yes. So now let's go to questions, because Human R has asked a really wonderful question, and I think it also triggered a very nice discussion, and I like to chime in. So this may be a speaker building 101 question, but it's not. It seemingly it is, but it's not at all, and it's really worth looking into it. So what happens is that why was he asking this question? He asked it because there was a previous video where I was talking about trying out something different for Lagrange, or you can try it out for any loudspeaker you want to, that instead of just one driver alone, you add an additional driver. And how do you deal with that? So when you have two drivers, then things change. So what you need to do is you either need to series them so that they are in series in the electrical signal, or parallel them so they are in parallel to the electrical signal. So if you series them, then the impedance doubles. If you parallel, the impedance halves. And Human asked something pretty amazing when you think about it, is that when you have a driver and then you add the second one it has an inductance, because the voice coil is a coil. It is a choke. So basically it's like adding a choke on top of your driver. So it is like adding a crossover to your driver. So isn't that going to cause a cut in the high frequencies? And now if I parallel the two of them, then basically the inductance of the coil is going to be halved. So am I removing a crossover from the system, from the loudspeaker that way? So am I going to have a better frequency extension? So that's the first part of the question, and I would like to elaborate on that. So what happens? So if it was not a loudspeaker but just a choke that has an equivalent inductance as a driver, and you add it on top of the loudspeaker, then yes, you will see that it's going to work as a crossover, and it's going to affect it in a really bad way, and your high frequency extension is going to suffer. However, a loudspeaker driver is something very different from an inductor. It also has capacitance, it has resistance, and much more than that, it also has acoustic output and feedback from the room. So it's something it's kind of like the difference between something like a painting of a cat and a cat. That's the quality difference between the two. So let's have a look at it. What changes? Because when you just add an inductor on top of your loudspeaker driver, then what happens is you have added an inductance with a negligible resistance. So that coil that you add in the crossover, compared to the impedance of your driver, has a totally negligible impedance and resistance, and that's why it will act as a crossover element. So let's see what happens when we look at the impedance and take the impedance into the calculation. So let's have a look at the Vcap crossover calculator. I have shared this the link to this website many times, and we are looking at the first order crossover calculation. So let's just say we have an 8 ohm impedance loudspeaker, and let's just add the points for both high pass, low pass as 8 ohms. So it will both calculate the capacitor for the high pass and the inductor for the low pass. So right now we are interested in the low pass, and let's say let's enter 1000 hertz. and let's say how does this system behave. So if we want a first order crossover at 8 ohm, then it's 1.27 millihenries. That's the inductance we need. So basically, if you have a big monster woofer that has this high inductance and it's an 8 ohm impedance woofer, then it will behave as if already it had a first order crossover at 1000 hertz. Now let's see what happens. And then let's just remember this value for now, 1.27 millihenry. So what happens if we boost the impedance to twice as much? So when we double up our drivers in series, then the impedance doubles. So now we have 16 ohms. Bingo. Check this out. The inductance of the two drivers in series is doubled. So when you add the same inductance, so basically you have the two voice coils in series, it's not going to alter the crossover point. The crossover point is going to be exact same as you had with one driver, and that's because by doubling the impedance we also double the inductance that is required for the exact same crossover point. And what happens when we drop the impedance? So from 8 ohm we drop to 4 ohm. You see it's 0.64 millihenry. So when you series the two of them, you get the half the inductance, and it's still the same crossover point. So when we double the impedance by seriesing two drivers, it's not going to change the crossover point. And if we parallel them, the crossover point still stays the same. So this aspect alone is not going to affect the high frequency extension capability of your driver, because we are not adding a choke on top of an active element, but we are seriesing two active elements, and the crossover of those elements is defined by their impedance. So it's a living, breathing system, and it's not just a passive figure that is unaltered by unaltered, period. So now let's have another aspect looked at, because this is one important aspect. So when we series or parallel them, does the inductance and other parameters of the driver change the sound quality? No, it does not. So provided that your cabling, I mean your speaker cable and the internal cables and your amplifier driving capability is solid, is the same for every resistance, then either paralleling or seriesing them makes no difference whatsoever. However, this is not reality. In reality, we have speaker cables, and speaker cables have impedances and resistances, and how that works out is actually the lower the current that needs to go through your loudspeaker cable, the less your loudspeaker cable is going to compromise the signal. So it is your preference that with any given loudspeaker cable, when you series the drivers, it's going to be easier on the cables. So you have the effect as if now you have doubled the thickness of your cables. So you have parallel two cables. And if you drop the impedance to half, you are paralleling them, then it essentially you have halved the ability of your loudspeaker cable to work into that loudspeaker. So basically, if we are placing the two drivers in series, from the standpoint of your cabling, it's massively preferred to series them compared to paralleling them. Now let's have a look at the amplifier itself. So if you have a tube amplifier, now let's look at this Stereophile review of a Conrad Johnson monoblock. I just typed in, you know, something random. Give me a tube amplifier that has multiple output taps, and this was the first thing that I run across. And look at that. So this is the figure that shows the measurement, the frequency measurement of this vacuum tube amplifier using multiple taps. Here the green tap is the 16 ohm tap, and then the 8 ohm tap, 4 ohm tap, and 2 ohms tap. And as you see, when we have a load and it's the exact same power output, at the 16 ohm, it starts to have a little kink here. Where is this? Around 30 kilohertz. Yep. So at 25 kilohertz, 30 kilohertz, there's a tiny kink there. Now, when we go for an 8 ohm, now this kink is much bigger. And we go for 4 ohms, we have a double kink. It's tremendous. And when we go to 2 ohms, then it's basically, it already starts dropping at 10 kilohertz, and then we have a major kink and then a second one. So you can see that for a tube amplifier that has its own output transformer, the lower you go with the impedance, the more it's going to have compromises with its frequency range. On the lower end, we also see compromise. So here, there you see, and there's a more pronounced drooping here. But it's not that big. It's not going to have that big of an effect. However, this thing now, here we had like problems basically beyond 25 kilohertz, and now we are having problems above 13 kilohertz when we go for between a 16 and a 2 ohm load. And this is also true for solid state amplifiers. They are generally have bigger distortion with lower loads. So essentially, basically, both of these guys have a problem when we are dropping the impedance. Yet at the same time, it also, these figures just say about the output transformer capacity and what your loudspeaker cable is bringing to the table. So these two, if they are constant and there's nothing else that affects your speaker, then just these major criteria alone will predicate that seriesing the drivers will be beneficial. However, what Edward has shared with us is that he found that when he paralleled his drivers, it sounded significantly better than seriesing them. Yet what he shared is that he did some extreme amount of seriesing that yielded him 32 ohms impedance. And that's something that I have experienced many times, is that when you have an impedance that is higher than what the output transformer can handle, then it's going to be significantly compromised. So this figure, I'm sorry, I need to change it for you, not for myself. Now I changed it for you. So when we are, I'm sorry, I clicked on, my mouse is automatically clicking on things. There is, okay, now it took me to somewhere else. So now we have totally lost it. My mouse, somehow the button got stuck and it just has a mind of its own. I think this is already the beginning of AI, right? Artificial intelligence, my mouse having a mind totally of its own. So basically, when you are using the dedicated taps and you are driving a dedicated load with a dedicated tap, that's when it has an optimal output. And when you put a load that is higher than the dedicated tap, it's going to get compromised always. So for example, if you have a 2 ohm output and you put a 2 ohm load on it, it's going to be happiest with that. If you put an 8 ohm load to that 4 or 2 ohm tap, it's not going to be happy. And so that's just one thing. However, there's also additional considerations. It's not just, so these are the basics. So I'm just tracing back my steps here, that if everything is stable, then and unchanged, and there's no other elements of your system reacting heavily with the impedance of the driver, then the given that you have the appropriate tap for your amplifier, the higher impedance load will be preferable. Now, what happens really is that most commercial speaker amplifiers only have 4 ohm and 8 ohm taps, talking about tube amplifiers. But even for solid state amplifiers, even though they do not have taps, most of them, some do. Very few, but there are some that do have output taps. They still prefer an impedance that is between 4 to 8 ohms. That's where they are happiest. And there are some solid state amps that can still drive a 16 ohm and be happy with it, but the number of those is few. And if you put 32 ohms or even higher on a solid state amp, it's going to be catastrophe. For what else I wanted to say something very important, but you guys see I'm a tiny bit distracted here. Oh, I got it. This is for Gerard. He was asking about the cats, and Kintaro is sleeping in the chair, in the Poyang chair next to me, and I'm going to grab him. He was pretty hard on Machi today. He was actually, I didn't see it, but Nanny told me that he did a really rough playing with Machi, so we are not really happy with that, and he beat her really hard. So I'm going to just wake him up from his quiet slumber. So here we go. Kintaro. Here we go. Yeah, there's Kintaro. He just woke up. That's why he looks so out. Anyway, we are trying to explain to him that to play with Machi, most of the time he plays with her very nice, but okay, now he's saying, okay, stop talking to him. Right? Okay, I think I should stop, because he's a really good cat, really good boy. And anyway, I think I have answered this video, and it is very important that the thread, just follow the thread that I showed. And Edward has shared something really important, that he tried out both seriesing and both paralleling his Altec drivers, and he reported them paralleling them sounded massively better. So don't just think of these things that now I showed you guys, that just the physics of it tells us that that seriesing them, it has massive advantage over paralleling the drivers. But that's just those aspects. So when they look at the taps, the output transformer taps, then why I have that's the thing. Okay, thank you, Kintaro. So he helped me to remember what I wanted to say. So when we had that the measurements for the CJ, that's not just a one-off. So you could say, what about other amplifiers? When you have an output transformer, when you have the lowest difference between the ratio of the primary and secondary, that's when the output transformer works the best. When the ratio starts to change, the more it goes off from 1-to-1 ratio, then the transformer becomes more and more limited. So when you look at transformers that have 1-to-1 ratio, they are also called interleaved transformers, and they just have an astonishing frequency bandwidth, and they are just phenomenal. And when you go to 1 to 2, there's a big jump between that. And then 1 to 5, 1 to 10, they're exponentially getting worse and worse. And when we have a 16 ohm tap and the 4 ohm tap, that's basically between the 16 ohm and the 4 ohm, we have a doubling in the ratio that we have to step down from the original. So if our 16 ohm was a 1 to 15 step down, then the 4 ohm will be a 1 to 30 step down. And that's going to cause major limitations, major problems, major issues for the transformer. So every manufacturer will have problem with that, and no matter how good they are, so even if they build an astonishing 4 ohm output transformer, those same guys with the same know-how will make a much better 16 ohm output transformer. So that's the thing. Thank you, Kintaro. So now he's almost forgiven for his poor behavior shown this morning. So, but beyond these things, so what also happens that when you series or parallel them, and then you put it on a different tab, often when you do these things, you also have to play around how you, so because in Edward's case, this was the woofer. So when you parallel or series the woofer, you also have to drastically alter how the compression driver is driven to match the impedance of the big bad boys. And then how you do that, that's going to actually have an even bigger impact on the difference. So I think, Edward, probably in your case, adding the compression driver into the mix to have the impedance of the whole loudspeaker stabilized, I think that was the main cause between which sounded good and which did not. So, but as always, it's really a long and winding road, and there are like I would say like landmarks along the way, or directions pointed on a roadmap, but there's always like unexpected shortcuts that can apply to specific circumstances, or maybe sometimes one solution would give you the perfect solution, but the interaction with your room requires something different. To match your room, you need something different than just the canonical perfect way to link up from amplifier through cable to the drivers. So we also have to add the room into the mix, and that can alter individual results. So that's it for today. Thank you for these amazing comments, and it will be really hard for me in the next couple of weeks to answer questions and make videos, but please bear with me, and just keep on with the comments. And I'm really glad that there are really lively discussions going on, and Hugo was also sharing a comment there where he wrote about the impedances and the frequency. Thank you, Hugo. That's really fantastic. I just wanted to expand on that on this video. So for those of you, please like, subscribe, and have an amazing day. And if you like my videos, then you can also get me a cup of electronic coffee. I really appreciate that, and it really goes a long way to support the channel, to allow to have better picture, better sound, and just to help to keep me going. Thank you. Bye bye. Let's stop it somewhere. I found the button.